Long ago, the forest of Glengraw was known throughout the land for its ancient oaks. They rose from the earth like living monuments to time, their trunks furrowed with cracks that whispered secrets of centuries past. When the winds would blow through their leaves, it was said one could hear the murmured voices of spirits long gone. Generations grew up with stories of guardians who bound their fate to these mighty trees, yet over time wars were fought, kingdoms fell, and new conquests overshadowed old lore. The tale of the Woodland guardians faded, existing only in obscure songs passed from father to son, or in cryptic lines woven into a tapestry of Celtic myth. People outgrew the forest, or so they believed, until they forgot that things more ancient than stone towers still dwelled in the groves beyond their field. In the modest village that bordered Glengraw's eastern edge, a young man named Eunan began unravelling these forgotten fragments. He was neither warrior nor druid, but a quiet lad who spent his days learning from his grandmother's tattered books, battered scrolls, and the hush of the forest beyond. Eunan's grandmother was the village midwife and its lawkeeper. She brought children into the world while cradling old legends in her heart. On stormy nights, when the rafters creaked like oak boughs, she would tell Eunan stories of a covenant older than any king's decree and more sacred than any abbey's vow, a brotherhood of guardians bound by soul and wood. But when Eunan's grandmother passed away in her sleep one autumn evening, a hush fell upon the village. The stories seemed to depart along with her fading spirit, and only Eunan held on to them with unwavering devotion. His grandmother's belongings contained a wooden amulet shaped like an oak leaf, meticulously carved with spirals reminiscent of Celtic knots. As soon as Eunan touched it, he felt a warmth in his palm, as though the amulet itself recognized him. An engraving on the back he could barely decipher read, Tianga Nanuina, the people's tongue. Puzzled but undeterred, Eunan resolved to do what his grandmother had always taught him, listen to the forest. So, at dusk the following day, he stepped into Glengraw with the amulet around his neck. The swirling breezes rustled the leaves into murmurs that seemed halfway between a lullaby and a warning. Mist coiled at the bases of mossy trunks, and the setting sun cast flickers of amber light that, in certain moments, looked almost like dancing figures weaving in and out of the shadows. Though he'd ventured that far many times, Eunan felt the forest in a new way. It was as though it pulled him deeper, each knot and branch telling a story of its own. At one point he stumbled across a fallen oak that had toppled after a long battle with rot. Yet even in death, its bark shimmered with faint runic inscriptions. He knelt down, tracing them with a tentative fingertip. To his astonishment, the carvings glowed a spectral green in the dim light. A swirl of power, subtle yet certain, coursed through his vein. If he squinted, he could almost see shapes flicker beneath the bark, silhouettes of people, or perhaps forest spirits, intermingling with the lines of runes. Despite the questions racing through his mind, Eunan pushed himself onward, guided by an inexplicable longing. That night, he set up a small camp near the trunk of the toppled oak. He noticed that as he lit his campfire, the wind calmed, and the forest seemed to hush, as though holding its breath. In the glow of the embers, he retrieved his grandmother's amulet. Turning it in his hand, he studied the walls and spirals that encircled the oak leaf's edges. A sudden memory unfurled. His grandmother speaking of a hidden glen at the forest's heart, where an ancient oak stood so tall its topmost branches vanished into the clouds, and where guardians once performed sacred rites under a full moon. Legend held that the oak's spirit could heal the land, renew the bond between people and nature, and protect both from calamity, if only the rightful guardian would awaken it. Yet the stories also spoke of dark moments when the covenant was broken and the forest nearly doomed to silence. Before sleep claimed him, Eunan caught faint strains of a melancholic tune. It wasn't a bird song or any melody he recognized from his village. It had a lilting quality that tugged at his heartstrings, as though it were calling him home. The tune drifted through the air on unseen currents, drawing him into half dream, half reverie. In that liminal place, he thought he glimpsed a tall figure clad in robes of green, hood drawn low, so only the glimmer of eyes could be seen. Behind the figure loomed a monumental oak, and its bark glowed with a shifting pattern of Celtic notes that pulsed like a heartbeat. As Eunan drifted off, the tune faded into a gentle sigh, and darkness swept over him like a soft blanket. At daybreak, he woke to find that a slender path had revealed itself near the toppled oak. He couldn't recall it from the day before, though it seemed perfectly formed, as though it had always been there, waiting. The path wound between rows of elm and ash, culminating in a stand of ancient oaks, with trunks so wide it would take 5 or more people to The bark of each tree bore swirling markings similar to those on Eunan's amulet. Indeed, the wood bore a living tapestry, spirals that twisted and turned like a Celtic triskelion, and lines that evoked some half-forgotten script. Even the leaves overhead reflected these patterns, sending dapple beams of light dancing over ferns and forest flowers at Eunan's feet. As he pressed forward, he picked up the thread of that haunting melody once more. It seemed to be emanating from the largest oak in the grove's center. This was no ordinary tree. Its trunk curved upward like a cathedral pillar, and its roots, gnarled and twisting, rose above the earth as if forming an altar. Though Eunan felt a chill, he continued, the amulet warm upon his chest. He placed both hands on the bark and closed his eyes. Instantly a presence flooded his senses, neither malevolent nor benign, but very much alive. He sensed a great sadness, a yawning emptiness, and an undercurrent of hope. Perhaps in that moment, the tree sensed he might be the one it had waited for. Suddenly, a voice broke the hush of the grove. "Those who would commune with the ancient oak must bear a pure heart," it said, resonant and calm. Eunan turned around to see a figure cloaked in green and recognized the faint silhouette he'd glimpsed in his half-dream. He was tall, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that gleamed like emeralds. "I am Coran," the man said softly, stepping forward without stirring a single leaf on the forest floor. "Few hear the oaks call these days, but you have come. Why?" Eunan struggled for words. His mind churned with memories of his grandmother's stories, the glow of runes, and the intangible bond he felt. He managed to answer, "I believe the woodland guardians of old still live somehow. This forest responded to my grandmother's amulet and led me here. I don't know fully why, but I feel it chooses me, or I am choosing it." Standing beside Eunan, Coran placed a hand on the trunk. "There was a time when the guardianship was a sacred covenant. We were once guided by the goddess Danu herself, protectors of the living wood. Our spirits bound to these oaks, we thrived in harmony and kept darkness out. But betrayal came. An ambitious king sought to harness the forest's power for conquest. The guardians were hunted, forced into exile or hiding. The covenant was abandoned. The shared song of life was silenced, and the oak's spirit was wounded. It sleepwalked away in sorrow. Only one chosen by the forest can wake it." He gestured to the swirling patterns that faintly glowed beneath Eunan's palms. Coran's eyes searched the younger man's face with pity and expectation in equal measure. "You bear the old sign, and the trees have recognized you. But guardianship is no mere title. It is a binding of fates between mortal and oak. Are you willing to risk body and soul to renew the covenant?" Eunan hesitated. Could he truly become such a guardian? Yet he recalled his grandmother's stories of hope, of how the guardians once brought healing to the land. The heaviness of the oak's sorrow pressed into his heart, and he heard the low hum of that lonely tune stirring in the leaves. Summoning his courage, he nodded. "Yes, show me the way." "That I might restore what was lost," Coran revealed that the guardians performed a sacred ritual under a confluence known as the triple moon, when the new moon, waxing half moon, and full moon all aligned in the tapestry of spiritual energies that once governed Celtic faith. It was no coincidence that Yunnan had been drawn here now, mere days before a rare lunar alignment. Once, each guardian learned the silent language of the oaks, surrendering their own mortal concerns to the forest's deeper rhythms, Karen explained. To command nature, one must first serve it. We speak with the voice of the leaves. Weave spells with starlight and harbour the forest's spirit in our soul. They walked as he spoke, weaving deeper into the grove. Corin guided Enon toward a clearing ringed by 7 granite standing stones carved with knotwork. In the centre stood another oak, slightly smaller than the colossal one, but no less imposing. Its branches formed a canopy overhead that flickered with patches of sunlight, giving the clearing a hush of sanctity. Here we enact the binding, Corin said, a note of solemnity creeping into his voice. You must pass the trials of the forest to be deemed worthy. Only then will the ancient oak allow you to awaken its spirit. The trials were threefold, each testing Yunnan in ways beyond mere physical endurance. First came the trial of roots. Corin led Yunnan into an underground passage beneath the old oak's roots, where passages twisted in labyrinthine fashion. The earthy darkness pressed in, but a faint glow emanated from the amulet around Yunnan's neck, acting as a guide. In those tunnels, he confronted illusions that twisted his sense of time and memory. He saw visions of his grandmother scolding him with disapproval, accusing him of arrogance in seeking the guardianship. He heard the cries of villagers mocking him for foolish ambition. Though haunted, he persevered, using the amulet's guidance to navigate the labyrinth. Finally, he listened to the quiet rustle of actual roots around him, trusting the forest's gentle hum to lead him back to the surface. Emerging victorious, Ernan sensed a small part of the forest's spirit blossom in his own heart. Next came the trial of branches, an ascent up the trunk of the smaller oak. Corin looked on silently as Ernan climbed, each rung more precarious than the last. Lightning forked across the sky and winds roared, thrashing the leaves. To climb a living tree in the midst of a storm was madness, but the guardianship demanded complete surrender to nature's mood. Half blinded by rain, Yunnan reached branches that swayed violently in the gale. Any misstep and he would plummet. But he steadied himself, recalling the whispered strength of centuries that lived in the oak's bark. He found handholds in the knots and cracks, letting the tree guide his motions. At length, through the swirling storm clouds, he glimpsed a fragment of silvery moonlight. A calm overcame him, quieting the storm within. With renewed resolve, he descended safely, heart racing but spirit aflame with new courage. Finally, the trial of the heart demanded that Yunnan confront his deepest fear, the possibility he might fail, not just himself, but the forest he sought to protect. Under the watchful gaze of the standing stones, Corin placed a hand on Yunnan's forehead, drawing forth a dark reflection from within. This shade took form, mirroring Yunnan, but with eyes full of doubt and bitterness. The shade taunted him. You know nothing. You are no hero. You will betray the covenant just as others did, living in regret and shame. Udan felt despair pulling at him like cold chains. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, summoning every drop of faith in the forest's goodness, and in himself. He faced the shade, proclaiming his willingness to serve, to learn humility in the presence of such ancient power. In a flash of emerald light, the shade dissipated into wisps of black smoke, leaving Yunnan shaking but unbowed. Yunnan completed the 3 trials, each testing a facet of his character. Corin's stoic face broke into a proud yet somber smile. You have done what many could not. The forest recognizes your resolve. They returned to the colossal oak at the heart of the grove. Twilight had claimed the sky, and the moon glowed in triple splendor, new, half, and full faces, overlapping in a cosmic dance known only to the old ways. A hush fell over the clearing, and other figures emerged from the shadows, men and women clad in green and brown. like living extensions of the forest. Perhaps they were the remnants of the ancient order, or spirits that manifested only in moments of great significance. A circle formed around the colossal oak, with Yunnan at its center. Corran raised his arms and incanted words in the language of old. The watchers responded, their voices resonating like a chord woven from leaves rustling in the wind, streams flowing over pebbles, and the crackle of a distant fire. Yunnan clutched his grandmother's amulet, feeling his heart pound. Tendrils of greenish light spiraled from the oak's trunk, dancing through the air like ribbons. They wrapped around him, drawing out shimmering motes from his chest as though unearthing his very spirit. Ground tremors coursed through the grove, and overhead the moonlight became a kaleidoscope, reversing the darkness with an otherworldly glow. In that pivotal instant, Yunnan saw a vision of the Covenant's past. Guardians in white robes standing vigil, singing anthems under an ancient sky. He saw the betrayal, soldiers with axes hacking at the oaks, fires raging, and anguished cries as guardians fell. He glimpsed the martyred spirit of the oak, wounded and withdrawn. Then the vision shifted, showing him a hopeful future, one in which the forest thrived again. Children played among sunlit groves without fear, and a line of new guardians rose to protect the land. By accepting this vow, he was accepting a legacy as ancient as the roots that wound through the earth. When the final word of the incantation resonated through the grove, there came a sound like 1,000 leaves gently clapping in applause. The green ribbons of light sank into Yunnan's chest, and from him, a renewed luminescence passed into the oak's trunk. He felt an exultant rush of unity. He and the oak were now bound, each the reflection of the other's vitality. The old sorrow that lingered like a dark stain in the forest's heart began to heal. It was as if the land itself sighed in relief, the canopy swaying in a tranquil dance. As dawn approached, the new guardians, awakened by the ritual, drew near. Some were revived spirits, while others were once-lost members of the order who had lived hidden lives. They pressed their palms to the oak's trunk in reverent wonder, thanking Yunnan for restoring the sacred covenant. Corran stepped forward, gently placing one hand on Yunnan's shoulder. "You are no longer just a villager. You are a vessel of this grove's spirit, and it, in turn, is your strength. Protect it well, for from it comes life itself." They spent the hours of sunrise walking through Glen Gra, reacquainting themselves with the forest in its renewed state. Water from the streams sparkled with otherworldly clarity. Wounded or dying trees seemed to regain some of their vitality, as if responding to a new heartbeat that resonated in the soil. Birds sang in an uncommonly vibrant chorus, and woodland creatures peered curiously from behind lush ferns. Where despair once hung in the air, now there was the promise of a second spring. Word of Yunnan's deed began to spread, carried by the forest's own murmurs as well as by travellers who passed by Glen Gra. The villagers initially dismissed the stories as fancy tales or illusions, but they could not deny the transformation of the land. Crops flourished in unexpected abundance, and the local wells seemed imbued with a refreshing coolness that was absent before. Old folk in the village recounted the day the orchard near the edge of the forest burst forth with blossoms out of season, a sign that reminded everyone of the old legend's truth. Curiosity drew some to the forest border, eager to see if the whisper of guardians was more than a fairy tale. While Corran and the reassembled circle kept to the deeper groves, Ernan made himself the bridge between the village and the newly awakened woodland realm, ready to greet those with reverence in their hearts. Still, not all was serene. Rumours circulated of those who might seek to exploit the forest for power or profit. The memory of the old betrayal was not lost on Corran or Yunnan. They doubled their vigilance, ensuring that no blade wounded the grove's heart again. Yunnan knew his guardianship was a lifelong commitment, for as long as an acorn might need to split and grow into a towering oak. The forest's cycles of life, death, and renewal became his cycles too. In time, he discovered that, much like the forest, he had to adapt, endure harsh winters of doubt, and flourish in the spring of hope. It was a lesson in humility and stewardship unlike any he'd known before. In the passing months, Unan would lead small gatherings on certain Celtic feast days, Samhain and Beltane especially, inviting villagers to partake in ceremonies of gratitude. Around sacred fires lit at twilight, they honoured the kinship between humans and nature. Slowly, Glengraw's influence radiated outward, as if each oak's roots carried blessings beneath the soil. The guardians who had once retreated came forward, teaching lost knowledge to those with earnest hearts. Medicines derived from healing herbs found new potency, and the chords of old melodies once more sang in the wind. Through it all, Unan was both the student and the teacher, the mortal caretaker of an immortal bond. His body moved through time, but his spirit was entwined with the forest's ancient pulse. More seasons passed, bringing storms that tested the resilience of Glengraw, and harvests that celebrated its generosity. With each challenge, Unan grew wiser, leaning on the fellowship of the guardians and the abiding strength of the colossal oak that had chosen him. Whenever doubt crept in, he placed a hand upon the trunk, feeling the hum of fractal life. He would remember the trials of roots, branches, and heartache, a testament that the forest spirit was worth every sacrifice. The centuries of pain that once coloured the bark with sorrow gradually faded, replaced by a gentle presence that seemed to welcome all who walked in peace. One evening, as Unan tended a ring of mushrooms at the forest's edge, a child from the village approached. She seemed timid, eyes wide with wonder. In her small hands was a picture, a childish drawing of a giant oak with swirling patterns and a figure standing before it. She offered it to Unan. "There's magic in the forest, isn't there?" she asked, voice quivering with excitement. Unan knelt down and ruffled her hair with a soft smile. "Yes," he replied, "but it's also alive like you and me. We must treat it with kindness, help it grow strong, and it will in turn look after us." The child nodded solemnly, gazing into the leafy canopy with quiet awe. Moments like these reaffirmed Unan's sense of purpose. Gone were the days where fear and doubt defined his path. In their place stood a gentle conviction that grew stronger with every passing sunrise, nurtured by the unwavering bond he shared with Glengraw. From the towering oaks to the tiniest blossoms, all life now seemed woven into a grand tapestry that his grandmother had once glimpsed through half-forgotten legend. And as the triple moon cycles came and went across the sky, the forest breathed anew, living proof that ancient covenants, though forgotten for a time, could be reborn stronger than ever before. Unan never claimed the title of hero. He was simply a steward, carrying forward a legacy that preceded kingdoms and conquerors. Yet in his quiet vigilance, the spirit of the ancient oak flourished, guiding him and all who ventured into its domain. Glengraw's legend, once on the edge of vanishing from the world's memory, now stood rooted in living gestures of harmony between humanity and the forest. And so the Guardian's watch would continue unbroken, devoted and ever bound to the soul of the ancient oaks that rose whispering secrets of centuries once lost but now joyously found.